I do a lot of field trips. I ask people to come out. Let's go to a lab where robots are being used. Let's go to that business where they've got neurodiverse people working. Let's get out, because I find you can give people lots of things to read, but if we go and we meet the humans, the whole transformation, we think we're stuck in our ways, we think we get old, and that's only because we keep having the same thoughts over and over, and so our brain thinks that that's the solution. If you can have diverse thoughts, you can, AI will never take your job, but if your competitor is going to use AI better, they will take it.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I have been really excited to get stuck into some of the really innovative concepts, that the amount of knowledge you have acquired, both being at a board level and consulting overseas and, within Australia as well, across so many diverse sectors, is really valuable for where we are heading right now in construction and infrastructure, or the golden decade that we're talking about, where we're going to have a myriad of industries needing people all at the same time. I want to start, I guess, broadly, from a broad sense, getting you first to tell us a little bit about your sector experience in your own words, and I guess the kind of work you have been doing, so the audience can get an idea of your background.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. I like to think I'm old, so I've acquired a lot of wisdom. I just have had a pretty fortunate life. I was born in Cairns. I grew up in Brisbane. I now know I was an entrepreneur. I was always a challenger of the as is, even in primary school and high school. So I was always the naughty, clever kid. So sort of scraped through school, not on my grades, but on my behaviour, because I was a bit of a rule breaker. And then just nothing that was being presented to me to go to uni, even though I clearly I've got an ability to process information and do whatever, a lot of things. I just couldn't find what I wanted. So I started a science degree, dropped out 6 weeks in, and then I always loved work. So I went back and just continued working in all sorts of jobs, did a gap year, and then came back to Brisbane, and my mum found me a really low-level job in a German, what we call trading house in Brisbane. I was doing lots of documentation back then before we even had lots of computerization. And that turned out to be a $4 billion private family office. It was a tiny little office in Brisbane for a very large, successful German company, and they owned massive things in shipping, transportation, logistics, construction, agriculture, land. And I just am always curious and a sponge, and so I asked lots of questions. I'd done German up to grade 9, and I could speak and write German, and so they were so impressed that this little girl from Brisbane could understand what they were saying. So they would talk in front of us, and then I would chime in German, and they go, the office girl knows what we're saying. And so then I kind of have always had, I think because I grew up in a very big family, and we were, really blessed, had a great upbringing. I've always been quite an ability to kind of, I love people. People are really humans are what makes the world awesome. So I have very good talent with actually engaging with people really well and understanding them, and then being able to learn from them really quickly. So I did a lot of that. And within 18 months, they had put me on an international kind of program where I went to Singapore and New York and London, and they gave me little assignments. And in Germany, they allow you to do what they call a business apprenticeship. So you're actually not at uni, but you're actually within the firm. They keep moving you every 6 months to different areas. So I learned how to do transportation. I learned how to trade currencies. I learned how to write insurance policies and underwriting for anything that moved around the world. I learned how shipping operations work around the world, trains, logistics, all of that area. And then I went in and learned how the agricultural business ran. And then on the back of that, we did kind of well, and they sent me to New York City and said, right, I've got a little job for you here. We'd like you to manage this inbound trading division that was largely trading Australian agricultural products, and it had 32 men in it, and I was 10 years younger than the youngest of those men. And so I got furiously kind of bullied, I guess, for the first 6 or 12 months. And then, I just stayed the course and made relationships, and we ended up being, taking that business from a quite small concern into one of the largest businesses they ran in their divisions. And we transformed a lot of the way of how the Americans procured our products out of Australia, which was much better for the Australian market. And then on the back of that, I kind of had enough. I did nearly all my 20s in New York.
Mhm.
Gave me ambition. Like I learnt that New York, it infected me. That just optimism and entrepreneurship and the sense of trying new things. And I thought, great, this is awesome. I've had all this great experience. I'll come back to Brisbane, buy a little cottage somewhere, and maybe get married, have a few kids. Get a job. I must be employable now, right? And I came back and I did 120 interviews, and I always got to the last two, and I couldn't get a job.
120.
Yeah.
Wow. But what an experience.
Yeah. And I finally said, the recruiters just said to me, Mon, we love you and you are awesome, but you'll never get a job in Brisbane. You'll have to go back to Sydney and Melbourne. I'd done some work in Sydney and Melbourne. They said they like people like you. And I said, what do you mean by people like me? And they said, well, first of all, you've got a bit of an American accent because you've obviously spent 10 years there, but you have this like ability to define how the world is and how it will be in the future, that in an office, remembering this is sort of the very early 2000s, in an environment like Brisbane, which back then was still what I would call a branch office city. We didn't have so many of those great homegrown companies, or if they did, they were still family owned. So they said, the people that are there that are 35, that are the CEO, they don't want people like you because you challenge them. They've got their dream job and they want to stay there. And they don't necessarily want people like you under them because they want a night, people come to Brisbane and stay there because it's a really good lifestyle. And what I'm loving about the change in Brisbane now, on the back of that, I eventually went back to uni because I figured, well, the problem must be me because, I'm a woman. We always make sure the problem's our own. It couldn't have been the environment I was in. And I went to start an undergraduate business degree, and thankfully the dean of the business school met me like day one and said, what are you doing here? You need to be in the MBA. You could teach business. And I said, oh, well, but I don't have, they go, that's okay. So they put me in a fast track through an MBA, and within 18 months I topped the class for the MBA college. And along the way I was learning coding, and I understood the power of technology. So I started 3 side hustles while I was at uni, and that was when I first came across the word entrepreneurship, which still to this day I don't like. I prefer the Queensland words like I'm a pioneer. I like to try new things. I'm an innovator. I love making things better. Like I think it's not about all this shiny tech bro stuff. It's much more about just taking practical problems and solving them in a much better way. So I then, on the back of that, all the consulting firms came to chase me because they then understood, wow, we've got this girl in Brisbane. She knows what the world looks like. She's done a bit of stuff. She's topped the class in the MBA. She must have a brain. So I then had this kind of moment where I went to work for not one of the big 4 because a friend of mine tapped me on the shoulder and said, whatever you do, don't do that. They'll destroy your soul. And bless my soul, forgiveness to anyone in the big 4 firms. I love them. They're beautiful people, but they are factories. And she could see that I had a uniqueness about my entrepreneurship that might have got back then. Remembering that's, 20 years ago, thumped out of me. So I went from there to working for a emerging tech company where I did a lot of work in systems change, and I picked up a project in Canberra doing a private project for the Prime Ministers and Cabinet, which I did from a non-solicited bid that I put in around the welfare system. And that changed. So I commuted between Brisbane and Canberra for 18 months, and we mapped the entire system for people that are on benefits for Australia. And it was both the most soul-destroying work I ever did and some of the best work I did, because I walked in the shoes of the most vulnerable people in our country and got a really deep understanding of why these systems fail people and why they fail not just the vulnerable people but other people, and how poorly they're designed and how they don't use technology and how they don't challenge systems, and people get really stuck in an environment that's very hard to innovate and change in. So we did a bit of an awesome piece of work which never saw the light of day, but now I see tiny little bits of it in fragments of policy that's now emerging, which was great. But in amongst that, I met and married a pilot that flew for Ansett. So I was commuting. And then, of course, just as I finished that project, Ansett collapsed and my husband didn't have a job. And you learn very quickly that these beautiful, glamorous jobs like pilots, when there's no planes to fly, the next best thing is you can drive a taxi. And I just had this feeling that my husband had done all this beautiful training, and he, it was sad that his talents would go to waste. And so the only place he could find a job was with Emirates in the Middle East. So I said, well, look, I've done 10 years in New York. I don't want to spend the rest of my life overseas. I love Brisbane. So we agreed to go over for a few years to Dubai, and so that he could fly. And on the plane going over there, I sat next to a guy that was a consultant for McKinsey. And before we landed in Dubai, after a meal and I shared a couple of glasses of wine, he'd given me his business card and he said, look, I'm always looking for people like you to run projects for me in the Middle East. I said, well, McKinsey at that stage only ever hired graduates of Wharton Business School in America. And I said, look, I don't have the the academic background you're looking for these. He goes, oh, no, you don't realise in the Middle East, I like to hire practical people. He said, we've got enough of those people from Wharton already in head office. We can, he said, these projects are small. They're sort of sub $5 million. So anyway, 2 weeks later, I sent him an email after I'd settled in Dubai and started to learn Arabic and learn how the lay of the land was. And 2 days later, I was on a private jet and we flew down to Oman in Muscat, in the country of Oman. And I started my first piece of work for him, helping one of the sheikhs, who was also the Minister for Oil, do a divestment of an oil asset that they were selling to Total in France. And my job was to help them mentor and coach the local Omanis that were going to be part of that transaction. There was just such a beautiful environment. I really enjoyed it. It was just fascinating, like the whole way that they moved you around the world. It wasn't like, you didn't jump in your car and go to Brisbane and do a job. They popped you on a little private jet. There was a little red carpet when you arrived down there. And so I did that, and then so that flew on to referral work that I worked for the sovereign wealth funds. I did projects with a number of the sheikhs' offices across the Middle East. I think mostly because A, I learned Arabic, and B, I had the Middle East had not really had the Industrial Revolution. In 1968, the UAE, when it was formed, had no sewage, no education system, no electricity network, and by 1972 they had mobile phones. So they didn't have that incrementalism that we had, from the steam engine, and then we gradually improved. They went from pretty much agrarian, do things manually, to automation. So it's a fascinating culture to operate in. And at that time they were wanting, there was a lot of development going on and there was a lot of opportunities. They had a lot of money. And so my roles tended to be, again, jumping on jets with a bunch of locals that had a big investment check to write, and we would go into Silicon Valley or into London, and my job was to help them navigate the way they would go through this. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't an accountant. I was just someone they trusted, and because I was a woman, I didn't bring, in the Middle Eastern culture, men are very competitive against each other, and the fact that I was a woman made it really easy for them to accept advice. And because the big fallacy in the Middle East is actually the women control everything. The outward is the men, but behind the scenes, their mums make all the decisions. They won't make any of those decisions, so their mum. So anyway, I spent nearly 10 years in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, working across the world, and I just got this privileged, remarkable masterclass time and time again with some of these big founders from Apple and Spotify, all those new companies as they were bursting out of their banks, were using money from the Middle East as some of their investment portfolio. So I picked up all this. I was just a sponge. And also they were doing some really good social work. We started a very big sustainability ambition, and we built the first zero carbon city from scratch in Abu Dhabi, which I just saw this week, had its 20th anniversary, and it is genuinely staying as a zero carbon city. And we got some really good progress on women and the advancement of the national women, and so I was really proud of the work that we did there. And when I got divorced, there was no reason for me to be there, and so my beloved Brisbane called me, and I came back, and I kind of this time knew I'd be unemployable because I had an even bigger kind of world experience that didn't really fit itself into some sort of interview situation where you might, tell me the top 3 things that you've done in your career or why you might fit this capability statement for this great job. And I love, there's a great process to that, but, I just didn't fit in any category at all. So Brisbane at the time was pretty low on the tech scene, but, I came back. I love Brisbane. I just love that we were always big enough to have stuff, but small enough to still to have relationships and to be able to navigate the city through friendships. And I don't mean that in many people have sort of portrayed it as sort of a corruption, but it's not corruption. It's actually a genuine want that people want to help each other to get better at what we do. And I also love that in Brisbane, specifically about Queensland more broadly, it's not about a work culture that works you to death. It's about a culture of how do we be smarter so that we can enjoy our lives. And I still think to this day, as we bring all this AI and technology in, this is really, I love that ambition, and we should not walk away from that as, we're not productive. We're super productive. We just do it smarter. So if we can find a way, to work less during the week, it's the way to go. So when I came home, I got involved then. I really wanted to take this vast experience and start to channel it. And I realized pretty quickly I didn't really have the right aptitude for the types of CEO roles that they wanted here. I'm much better running at speed with scissors in my hand, changing and breaking things and helping bring finance and capital together to really be ambitious and change. So I started turning up and working with a few of the local entrepreneurs that were driving tech, the startup industry and tech, and just started volunteering my time, and that led pretty quickly to that first tranche. I don't know if your viewers know, but there's a big program of work that's been going in Queensland for nearly 10 years now called Advanced Queensland, and we started quite small, and I think now there's been nearly $340 million invested, but it's probably returned $10 or $20 billion to the local Queensland economy. Several of those massive startups like Go One, and some great developments in R&D that are now licensed in the med tech and in the mining tech all around the world that had that nucleus in those tiny little beginnings where we mentored those companies and helped them get capital. And so that sort of led me down a path of really being part of helping that. I hadn't divorced very well, so I didn't have a massive amount of money to invest. Girls out there, divorcing anywhere in your 40s and early 50s, problematic. So it's a good thing that I love work. And work for me is a craft. So I feel like I'm an artist, that part of what I do. So, I feel less about, when will I retire, and more about what's my contribution. And I guess that brings me, it's a long way of saying what my role is now. I sit on boards, I help mentor and coach companies that are challenging and changing the systems that exist today in order that they can be better in the future. So that would be in a technologically implementing change. It could be in a material sense, so that what we use to develop and build things would be different. It could be in how we do processes, how we do things differently. It could be completely new vertical that we don't imagine today that someone else can imagine. And I help those organisations. My preference is for women founders or founders that are underrepresented, mostly because a lot of the problems we need to solve in the future, actually we've had a very masculine approach to how we problem solved, and that's been a good thing because, there's bunches of stuff that men bring that are strong and decisive, competitive, very singular focused. Women bring, my experience is that women often bring much more varied life experience to the problems that they solve and how they solve them. So therefore it becomes, and that experience is part in this complicated, complex world that we're stepping into, that ability to just stay calm and deal with multiple things and then work our way through it, but stay true to some essence. Because if we try and compete and win our way out of this next thing, it's not very helpful. It's not the right approach. We've got to stay nimble. We've got to change. We've got to adapt. And I find so I've backed a number of women founders, helped them find capital, which is very hard because most of the capital is controlled by men, and they tend to look at just what they always think their gut will tell them to invest in what they know, and what they know is this beautiful masculine world that we've tended to live in. So when women turn up and go, I want to solve this problem and I'm going to make you some money and we're going to do some good and people are going to get jobs and we're going to save the environment, they go, oh, is that a charity? They go, no, that's called impact investing and it is the future of our world. So that's kind of how I get today. So I sit on boards, I help entrepreneurs raise capital, I help really champion and use my longevity and my deep relationships I've developed to help connect and make change.
Okay, so such a varied and great history that you've shared with us. One thing I want to ask you, which is prevalent across everything you've described, is that you've had this mindset of challenging the status quo. Was that something you always had, or where do you think that was formed or developed, that ability to look at things in a different lens or a different angle?
Yeah. So I grew up on the south side of Brisbane. I grew up at Upper Macrovat. I'm one of 8 kids. I have 7 brothers. My mum was a social entrepreneur. Her parents had run and owned hotels built and then run in hotels in North Queensland. So my mum had actually never grown up in a house where she had to cook or clean or keep a house. They'd always lived and been looked after by in the places that they built and owned. But she'd been an entrepreneur. She'd worked her whole life since she was 14. She'd gone to boarding school. And my mum was a great problem solver. And then my father was a customs officer, but his real passion was the environment. And so he would take us out every Saturday, all 8 of us would all line up like we were the Von Trapp family, and we'd take a little walk through Mount Gravatt, at the time up Mount Gravatt Mountain, and we'd pick plants and look at animals. And he taught us a real respect for the natural systems of the world and that how nature changes stuff. So and my mum was always a defender of human rights. We always had people at our house, even though we had quite not chaotic. We had a full house. There was lots going on. It was a great place to grow up. But there was always extras. There was either, a priest coming asking for some help or a nun, or there was, now I would explain them as people escaping family or domestic violence. At the time, as you're a kid, you're not really aware of it. There's just a couple of extra kids in the house for a few days and, they would move on. And it's really only in my later life now that actually I'm meeting some of those people or their children, and they tell the most beautiful stories that I never knew about my mum, that she helped so many people, either from that level or just, get a job or, learn to drive or, someone who was doing it tough, she would always know. So I'm kind of the perfect and we would sit every night together. We had a massive, we didn't have lots of stuff, but we had this richness of conversation as, my mum and dad had both been quite educated at a time where maybe not everyone went to uni, and we had this massive map of the world on the back of our kitchen wall, and they would ask us every day to look through the newspapers and cut things out and then put them on the wall where that thing was happening. And so over the dinner table we'd have these really interesting conversations about what was happening in the world, and we would ask to question things, and not in a kind of academic way. It was actually just conversational, and as a consequence we're a really close family, and we still have those conversations every week, whatever city I'm in, and whereas many of us get together, we all have a family dinner and we're still asking about injustices in the world or how to change it. And we're all very different, but, we've got one in the law and a couple in construction, and, one builds hospitals, one sort of quantity surveying and builds renewable energy assets, and then we've got an optometrist. But we have this intersection of how the Bradleys kind of get together and meet and just solve problems. So I think all the way along, I've got that spirit of my mum. She couldn't walk past injustice, and my dad couldn't walk past a system that was broken.
Excellent, insights there from a parent perspective as well, just around creating that, conversations and having, that ability to invoke curiosity and questioning in your children and things like that as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, and I think being one of 8, I was kind of self-raised, to be fair.
Yeah.
But it was in the Brady Bunch kind of 80s, right? So there wasn't so much maybe danger, or maybe we weren't aware of it. So, with that many kids, you didn't get all that one-on-one attention. So there was a lot of, peer raising, and so we had a fair amount of freedom to. And we lived in a really safe neighbourhood, and we had lots of local friends, and it was a different real time. I sometimes wonder, we're trying to recreate a bit of that now, and that we talk about that a lot with the next generation of ours. So we have holiday houses close by where we know that all the cousins can get together, and we try to have family dinners, and we bring out board games and cards, and we encourage, we never had a kids table and a family and a parents table. We always just had a table. We've done that in the next generation of our family too.
Okay. So one of the things I'm sure you've discussed, given the intersection of people in your family and also the roles you've been in, is the future that we're looking at in Queensland now in construction infrastructure. And it's no secret there are certainly going to be some challenges we face building the future of Queensland and Brisbane. Talk to me a little bit more around some of the common themes you see or things we're going to need to be aware of as we build for the future.
Yeah. So number one is just the mindset with which we approach, and whether it's construction or any industry, just the challenges that are in front of us. Part of it is the unlearning. So, a lot of what I learnt in my early career, actually now that we have technology and we have some of the parameters have changed, actually it's no longer valid. And so equally with engineering, some of the engineering stuff, that were constraints in the old days and maybe not constraints now that we have capabilities in a different way. So I think there's some we need to be able to build adaptable structures. So structures that adapt to not only the changing climatic conditions that are around us. We're obviously going to get more floods and more winds. There's going to be heat rise. So we need those structures to be thinking with that adaptability and how they cool and how they clean. We need to think about the embedded carbon that's in them because, there's a direct correlation between that. So finding new materials that can help us with how we do that. But also this, the construction industry is beautiful. We think that we're doing it, but the really the innovation in that sector has been quite low. Like we've introduced some tech, but we still, for instance, the thing that's most critical to anyone on a construction site is making sure they've got enough materials so that we never delay anything. But in doing that, we probably over-order 40% of the materials we need for a contract often, so that just in case the materials are there. And then we have, how do we manage those sites that are effective? And then we have rain delays, and we're going to have inclement weather as climate starts to impact. So, taking it from this outside activity to an inside activity, modular is definitely a big theme, using much more technology for designing, but thoughtfully designing, not the same brick blocks. How are we designing, I have to have these conversations, a house that has no operating costs, or a building that has zero operating costs. How might we? And so for me, the future is a bunch of questions that ask us how might we, not how do we. So now, at the moment, we're still in that transition phase. So we're still, a lot of people get hired because they know how do we, and we've been incrementally, so if I've built this same style of building 10 times, people go, great, low risk. Right? Because I've engineered this before, I've architected it before, I know this building works, right? But there is times now we're building that building that is low risk in terms of you'll get what you pay for and it'll be done on time and it will give you what you want. But is that actually the right structure to build for the next 50 years? Probably not. So we're getting to a stage where building what you've built before really well and to its best of its thing is actually still the wrong thing to build.
So how do we target that in terms of, and there's a couple of angles. One is where contractors are operating at such tight margins, where does the change come from to get them to start to prioritise carbon emissions, sustainability, inclusion, those sort of factors? Where does the change need to come from?
Yeah. So first of all, it's a much bigger change because our entire economic system decided at the beginning of in the 1900s when we set up the economic measures of how we measure GDP and a bunch of these things, there was a deliberate decision that the externalities of humans and largely environmental factors would not be built into those models. So we would only count the financial things, right? So what's happened is We've got lots of great companies and individuals have built really great businesses, awesome businesses, employed lots of people, and by default have done social good. And where possible, they've tried to minimise any damage to the planet that they could do. But we didn't have a regulatory or a deliberate system to help those people pay what I would call externalities. So if companies grow, but then because of consequences, they're trying to reward, we've become obsessed with the shareholder and giving returns to the shareholder. So that sort of works on a scarcity model. So I've got to make so much money for the shareholders so then people will continue to buy my stock and it'll stay at a price and we'll all get rewarded. But in doing that, we often means we cut jobs. And when those people get cut, then the society bears the cost of those people transitioning to another job or into another way. The mental health system gets weighed down with the pressure of that. We bring in additional family. And I'm not saying that people should be stayed in their jobs forever, but I think there needs to be much more thoughtfulness in how the humans interact with that. Sometimes we provide workplaces that are probably physically safe, but maybe psychologically not so much because of the pressure that's on people to always deliver to a contract and, management are under pressure. So I think there's that part of it. And then the climate part of it is we definitely have not been building to take into account that the resources of our planet are not infinite, they're finite. And so there's external boundaries of that. And we're starting to see that now with the rise in temperatures and the inclement weather. And so, the beautiful thing is the natural systems actually are. So I see that what happens is the industrial age has been full of what I call the ore world. So, and this is like every textbook taught you this. Like this, everyone's operating on a model that we actually thought was the right model. We either made money or we did social good or we looked after the environment. So every time we choose to make less money in order to accommodate maybe a different style of work engagement with our employees or a different style of engagement with the environment, investors and people in financial markets have told you that's a discounted return. I would say that So that's a scarcity thinking. The world is this shape, and anything that I change in it will get smaller or get bigger. I'll have to fight you because there's only this amount, and if you win, I lose. That's a very industrial age way of thinking. What I'm seeing now in emerging thinking and practices is an abundance thinking. So actually natural resources are infinite. If I go and talk to the regenerative movement that's working on our land systems and how we might bring biodiversity back, they're actually wildly optimistic. They said we can grow enough food, we can bring back deserts to be flourishing systems. We know now that we know and we've got technology, know how nature works, we can fix a lot of that and we can actually thrive in this world. But in order to do that, we've actually some of these fixed rules that have been decided by the markets that this is what a great return looks like will change. And we're seeing that with the rise of institutions like benefits, B Corps, benefits corporations. The whole art of business was to do good. And the whole reason we started businesses back in the early, late 1800s, early 1900s was in order that they could assemble labour so things could get done better for both the working force, because they didn't have to turn up every day and beg for work. They could be structured, and then the entrepreneurs that put the capital up could actually also be assembled and ordered better. We've kind of lost touch with that somewhere along the way, and it became about this market mechanism to make more money. And then we've got a narrowing group of people that money benefits, and then that money doesn't spread more. So these new models that are emerging in both social enterprise, impact investing, and what I call the AND model. So if we use really good design now, we can make really good returns, right? We can actually have a social engagement both with the people that work inside the company and the stakeholders that are in the neighbourhoods that surround you or in your supply chains that supply your companies. And we can also live in a carbon-constrained world that's regenerative, but it requires a massive change in your mindset.
So if we need to change our mindset, what are some of the things we need to unlearn?
Yeah. So some of the mega trends that will help us with this are demography. So we're probably at the large, I was just at a lunch now that was talking about succession planning, and the next 5 years, the change out of family businesses from generations to the next generation is massive. It's extraordinary because we had that big baby boomer and that bubble of the baby boomers starting to move out of active working into different roles. I think we have really underestimated the impact they'll be. So that means we're bringing back up younger people, the next generations in. Those people are, my experience when I interact a lot with young people and the next generation, do a lot of mentoring, there's a very different mindset there, growing up in just with different parameters around them, and what's important to them is very different too. I think our parents' generation really struggled and thought the best thing I can do is, maximize the wealth I can do so that I can give, but we're not going to have the benefit, of some of the assets of real estate and things that middle generation had. So we're going to have to think of new models because humans are great. We have this great way. So I think demography will help us. Technology will help us, right? So there is ways that we can now use both AI, regenerative, we can use problem solving. It won't take your job. It'll actually enrich your job. So actually whatever problem I'm solving, humans will still be the architects of the design, no matter what it is, whether it's social, environmental, or financial. It's the humanity that brings us the cleverness, and it's the humans working together that will never change, but we'll actually empower and use technology in a really useful way that will mean that I don't spend 3 hours drafting the base draft. I let my paid regenerative closed loop AI do my first draft from lots of knowledge I've already put out there, and then I spend a thoughtful hour actually really making that a much better work product. And we'll find that with all forms of design. So I think technology will help us, demography changes will help us, and also the change out, alongside the demographic, it's a change in the younger people coming through and taking on responsibility will be elevated and will get a different philosophy.
What do you expect to see around the philosophy shift of the younger generation coming through? Because you mentioned you've done some mentoring. What are some of the things that they see differently, think differently from previous?
Yeah, the digital first that's number one. So, there's not a YouTube clip or a TikToker that they can't go and learn a basic skill really fast and then unlearn it if they need to. Part of the issue is making sure that things are verified so that we understand they're learning the right things and they're not, equally spreading misinformation or disinformation. They haven't had the experience to want to repeat like we did. Baby boomers have been in the workplace a long time, so they've actually, that movement at the top of companies has not been as frequent as it would be, and so we've had a very narrow window to that. So a lot of people have, had to sit in middle or lower levels. So, but I don't know about you, but anyone I talk to, just there, it's funny. I go into companies and I said, "Do you have an AI policy?" And they go, "Oh no, we don't use AI here." And I go, I'm just looking around your office here. Anyone under 30 is using AI, can I just tell you?
They're in ChatGPT whether you think they are or not. Yeah.
And
Copilot or all the Gemini. Whatever.
Correct.
Yeah.
And in fact, if their work performance has gone up recently, I'd say it's because they're probably clever at doing their AI. And that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's not like these things compete with us. AI will never take your job, but if your competitor is going to use AI better, they will take your customer.
That's a really good one to reflect on. Okay, so I want to unpack a bit of case studies here because I know you work with and you've spoken about working with founders and businesses. Can you give us an example of where you've had a business that you've worked with that has really embraced that end model instead of the or, where you can share with us you've seen it firsthand?
Yeah. So I think things like a number of people that are taking what used to be, we thought that the world was linear. We made ingredients and things, whether they be for construction, steel, iron ore, wood, we functioned them, plastic, mouldings, marble, and then we assemble those into, we used energy and craftsmanship and mechanical to assemble them. And then we put them together in interiors and in built structures. And we tended to think that then when we were finished with that build structure, we just knocked it down and we sent it to, when I was a kid, we called it the dump. I think now we call it the Resource Recovery Centre. But it was a very linear process. Once you used it, we discard it. And we did the same with plastic. That was kind of our model. Our model was not circular, it was linear. And then what we learned was that stuff that we send to the landfill actually reaches into our waterways and it's not a good thing. And so we started to regulate that. But then we still didn't really wake up until probably a couple of years ago that actually there was still chemistry in all those items. And what a waste that we'd spent all this time building steel and making metallurgical coal and mixing it with iron ore and this great process and used all this great furnaces and energy to build this stuff, only then to bring in a wrecking ball and knock it all down, put it on a truck and send it to a dump, right, where it would sit idly and reach into our kind of waterways. And you go, oh, wow. I mean, the great example I saw on this little area was like the Dexus development downtown Brisbane, where they're redoing the financial district down at sort of Waterfront Place. And, as I watched that demolition, my heart leached to say, oh, I wonder what's happening with all that. And the trucks would come. And then I met the Dexus guy one day and he said, oh, no, we recovered 97% of that. And we're remaking all of that steel, the steel we've recovered and all of the concrete we've recovered. We've taken it to a place out at Pinkenbar and they're refashioning those into the concrete pylons that we will put back into the river that will hold the next generation of the building. And so this circular thinking, at the moment, the economics of that are getting better and better. Part of it needs to be sort of regulated because we don't have any more room. We've got to build houses and we've got to build structures that are really that are going to be of benefit to our society rather than landfill, which doesn't really bring us any benefit at all. So that one of the most exciting areas I think is the circular economy, and that will come in a lot. I'm watching it now with some emerging companies where commercial defits, they used to come in again and we just wrecking ball a whole lot out. Now the thoughtfulness. And it's also the other beautiful thing is some of these are creating jobs for people that are neurodiverse. So it turns out if you would like to recover greater amounts of, say, an interior fit out that you're defitting, if you can assemble, and there's a couple of workforces that particularly work around neurodiversity, particularly neurodiverse people that are very precision driven, they can remove 99% of the tiles without breaking them. They can remove ceiling tiles, floor to ceramic tiles, workbenches, disassemble furniture. These tasks that are that require patience and repetitiveness, turns out this is a beautiful marriage with some of the divergencies of neurodiversity, similar to how Microsoft is now hiring particular spectrum people that like doing testing of because their attention to detail is so high and their ability to do repetitive tasks in a digital world is quite high. So I'm loving that we're embracing now potentially neurodiverse people that might not have fitted our normal model in the past in terms of what we wanted in a workplace. So there's the neurodiversity is kind of a social benefit. We're representing that those talents are actually really useful. And so let's put them in. And then but we need the social entrepreneurs that know how to design those companies to solve problems in a really different way and how we recover that. So I think the circular economy is really big. I've got other ones with, like just using natural ventilation, how we augment a building, rather than we've always built for the maximization of floor space, and yet, often we set up with an idea of if it's a residential apartment, we're going to sell them all at this amount of money and, the business plan always looks great. But we always end up, it's like the stock market. The share price is at here, but you also have some people that lose on the share market down here. Yeah. And over time, somewhere around the middle is where your returns end up being fair in your basket of, no difference. And it's the same with how you sell an asset once you've created it. Yet we build them to maximize that selling price, but we end up discounting it anyway. So couldn't we actually take some of that and more thoughtfully, the business proposition is more to say, how do I build this so that it's really it's better value for money for people because they have lower heating bills. They have lower, it's naturally ventilated, so we don't need as much electricity to run that. It's naturally augmented in a way that the sun is harvested through solar panels rather than harvested through our windows where, we have to close all the windows down and we can't live an outdoor lifestyle. So I think the design becomes much more precious. And then how do we reuse new materials that are manufactured in modular places so these structures can go up much faster? We don't have the interruption of weather. We can use automation so we could take away a lot of risky jobs and things that are unsafe. So I'm a big fan of modular. People often say, you can't do modular in high rise. That's really just more science that we need to apply, thoughtful, how might we and how do we make that work? So we start with the and business of, I've got a woman at the moment that is, ironically, it's in a consumer product business that solves essentially what she is selling is increased fertility for men because she's dealing with low sperm counts. But the sperm counts have been driven by the fact that for the last 30 years, the standard underwear for men is polyester. And now science tells us that polyester has actually, how you pull your polyester out of the dryer and you get that static electricity? That static electricity actually has a direct effect on the quality of sperm. And so she has actually completely redesigned not only the form, like the material that she uses that are natural fibers so they breathe, but also the design of men's underwear so that there is a nice place for men's scrotums and places so they're more comfortable, they get more air ventilation. And within a 30-day cycle, the quality of men's sperm increases dramatically and people can have a lot more, can have their children more naturally, and also, it reduces the incidence of infertility, and it's more comfortable. So again, and she's designed it using materials. She's now using innovation to mass produce those with robots so that the price is coming down so people can afford them. But also it's the total cost of ownership. So people were having to save up and mortgage their houses to go and do fertility treatments that a $60 or a $50 pair of 3 pairs of underpants can actually potentially change in 30 days.
Wow. I mean, one of the things that's not lost on me as you're talking through your journey.
They're called cool beans, by the way.
Oh, cool.
She's a beautiful scientist from Brisbane that had a fertility issue, and she actually, like many people, she experimented on herself and it worked for her. She'd had a terrible time with fertility with her husband, and they realised that the quality was the issue and they rectified it by designing their own pair. Yeah. And then she's a scientist, so she's redesigned it now and done the trials. So cool beans, have a look at them.
That's really incredible. One of the things that isn't lost on me that as you've been speaking and just reflecting on your career is, your mindset, your innovative way of thinking that is needed definitely in construction and infrastructure. but also that there were barriers, and there are still barriers at times to people that either are neurodivergent or also and have different ways of thinking. One of the questions I wanted to ask you and your thoughts is, how do we – I don't think it's okay that we're missing out of 120 interviews that, you know, that somebody with your skill set may not come to fruition and may not come into the role that they need to be, and that is influencing the boards, influencing where change needs to happen. What do we need to do is, as an industry, to make sure that we're more inclusive, that we are allowing different ways of thinking to come through, from my perspective, from the recruitment process? What are your thoughts there?
It's a definitely, well, number one, it starts with leadership and mindset, and it doesn't start with the recruiter. It starts at the mindset of the organisation and the people that lead it. And that's why I spend so much of my time now stepping into the boardroom, because to me it's the wheelhouse of where really strategic decisions are made, and then the beautiful management teams and the energy that comes behind really good decisions at the board table then get executed. And you challenge is the wrong word. You actually inspire and delight and set how are we going to solve this complicated problem together back into the executive team. And when that's working, that alchemy is just delightful. It's like watching a symphony of music play out in front of you, and it's unleashing people. Like we almost this last part of the industrial age have become almost like robotically addicted to, a certain type of practice and mirroring someone else's practice to win harder, to play better. And the analogies that are all in that kind of war analogies, and they really doubled down on them, imagining that the world is this finite thing that we have to win, and I have to win, and if I win, you lose. Yeah. And that's just not it's actually nature teaches us that's not the way. We can actually both win because we can make the pie bigger, but the pie will be different. We can't make the pie bigger if we insist that the returns for this group is always going to be at this accelerated rate. But if we actually start to say, what is really important? How do we build great companies that are sustainable? And I don't mean that in sense of ecologically, but sustainable because they're great humans and they're a good experience to come to, and people will naturally come in and grow in them, and they'll grow with you. They'll create great benefit. You create great. To me, the theory is about how do we create better shared value. So how do we create better value across the board, from employees, from the materials we use, from the processes we use, and even in how we market and sell those to our end consumer or to our business client, much more relational rather than transactional. Like we've got to this transacting place, which means I'm going to transact. So my job, if I'm selling, is to make the most money and make you pay more. Like maybe this trick is not to make you pay more, but to pay less, but to repeat buy, and that we have a relationship. So I have to spend less money re-recruiting you again. It's like customer acquisition and then retention. Like if we actually have a really good, and we see this all the time in engineering relationships where, we've got the people that go to tender all the time, and the tenders cost a lot of money. Yes. We know the people, I don't need to name, and we shouldn't name them. I don't have a lawyer present, but you see people that tender all the time, or categories of a person that will tender, and you watch people add 40% to every one of those tenders because they know that people will change their minds, or I'll bid low because I'm going to do variations on everything, right? And how do we actually, that's a standard in the industry, but there's a lot of inefficiency in that. And heaven forbid we overbid and then everything works out fine and we get a really good managers and everyone works really well and we're really clear with the mission we set out to. We make decisions quickly. We don't change our minds a lot. Then how do we share that value we've created? Like the models at the moment don't. They're very contractual. Yes. So I'm really working with a lot of new wave economists that talk about how do we create shared value models that say they reward. And ironically, some of it's back to the future. Like in the 30s and 40s when we couldn't assemble the capital we needed, we assembled the humans into what we called cooperatives and mutuals. And so we had distributed ownership amongst citizens for certain assets that we all had a shared ownership in. So as we used those services, we were actually building a great company that was employing people and doing a service that we wanted to continue to use because we actually owned it, and it provided us with a little dividend. Didn't provide us with enough money to retire or buy a house, but it provided a little dividend for us. And so I think the new models of the future are going to think much more like that, fractional ownership. I will definitely see that in the housing business. And when we talk about crypto and digital, they're very different things. To me, digitization ownership, where we might be able to use technology and digital asset ownership to allow a wider group of people to participate in ownership. For instance, commercial real estate. It's really tied up with people that have a lot of capital already. And so therefore, if you've got a lot of capital, you can buy more of these assets. So then we're getting more and more people that have got more and more of commercial assets that are more and more wealthy in it. And there's really not a chance, for instance, for someone that's younger and emerging to maybe enter that asset class. So I think people that come in and fractionalise the ownership of some of those assets and bring not just fractional ownership like a share registry might, but actually bring people that generally have an affection or want to be part of a community to own that asset. Because that asset, whether it be I'm big at the moment on the multi-use of the intersection of sport, community, learning. So at the moment, this whole idea that we build schools that are used between, 7:30 in the morning and 5 or 6 o'clock at night, 5 days a week. But we built these massive structures. On the weekends, the playing fields might get used, but we've got loads and loads of classrooms. When people were looking at the Gabba and the redesigning of the Gabba, there was a lot of controversy about that beautiful little East Brisbane State School. And one of the innovators I was talking to, they said, if we rebuilt the Gabba there, we could put the school in the Gabba. And I said, how would that work? They said, well, when you go to the Gabba and there's all those about the, near the top, there's all those little glass boxes where people go to and have a meal and watch the game in air-conditioned comfort with a bar behind them. And I said, they were the corporate boxes. They go, yeah, well, imagine if we designed each of those to be a classroom. So Monday to Friday, each of those, it might be 1B. And then on the weekends, it's the corporate box for the Lions and because it requires very much the same thing. It's a little space where people get technology and can see things, and out the back they would be looking at the Gabba. So, I'm not saying that that's, we'd have to do the economics, so we'd have to look at the value of it. But again, we've got to really challenge clubhouses and libraries, and the future is actually multi-using those assets so that the community, we don't build 5 of those things so that they each get used a day a week or 2 days a week, or they're not at a utilisation of 30%, 50%. School holidays, they're empty most of the time. We're learning a lot about that right now, ironically, with the Olympic Games coming, because a lot of international teams want to come here and train ahead of the Olympics, and they're looking to some of the best assets we have sit in schools. But the schools obviously are populated with pupils a lot of the time. So people are now looking at, oh my God, there's quite a bit of, they come and pay to do that. What are the opportunities now that sit for these assets to be better utilised? So for me, building assets for multi-use, even houses. How do we take a house from being a configuration that suits, a family of, 2 parents and 3 kids, but then can modify into a house that, when the kids leave, the parents can have a really comfortable part of the house for 2 people, but there's an ability for the other bits of the house that the children would have had to be actually either rented or shared with another, either intergenerationally in their own family, or within the neighbourhood, creating additional spaces. I mean, part of our crisis is actually that we've got a lot of underutilised housing assets that are sitting there either vacant because they're only used infrequently by offshore owners or owners that, are living in a seaside and come and go. All of that is great. I love the freedom to do that. But I just think we need to rethink the model so that there's better utilisation of the embedded carbon and the asset we've created, so that this society overall is better.
One of the things I'd love to unpack a little bit with you is you talk about the fact that it stems from a board level, or it stems from the leadership level that we're seeing to, have this shift or this change. What are some of the things you do when you consult at a board level to encourage that transformative, innovative way of thinking that I feel comes really naturally to you, but no doubt you might have to come in to a board that is stagnant or some challenges there? How do you do that?
Oh, well, it's a human process. So number one is you just got to be a good human and listen. People don't decide to sit on a board and be stagnant and to all agree on things and not and deliberately not want to move. Genuinely, everyone that sits on a board comes to it and they're all legally obligated to do the best interests of the company. I think what happens is so people genuinely believe in resisting, some innovation or some change. They're doing the right thing by the company. So we've got to respect that, right? So I don't by any means come in and assume that they're wrong. What I try to bring is stories, and I try to bring a lived life experience or access to maybe sources of information that my colleagues don't have, so that we can at the board table just have a fuller discussion. And all I ever ask of my colleagues, as they would ask of me, is that we're provided an environment where we can respectfully listen and we can have quality discussions. The whole idea that every board has to agree on everything, behind the closed doors, those discussions should be robust. It should be, I don't even like the word battle, it should be a really quality conversation. How might we? And the number one thing I often see, and I ask this of our leaders, whether they be at a political or a government level to lead the civic service that is so important to our nation, or whether they're a leader on a board as a chair or as a board member, or a leader in our civic society as a community leader, or a leader as a CEO in large or small organisations or not-for-profits. I ask them could you please just have more ambition that our world can be better? And if you start with just wanting an ambition for better, and that's hard in these times. If you look at what's happening in America right now and you read newspapers that, you've got to remember the business model for newspapers, bad news sells more newspapers than good news, right? So over time, that's really got out of control. So actually very rarely does our media give us the full story. We've got to go looking. Where do we go looking? We go looking for people that are telling us stories that we don't hear. And people often, this happens to me, I feel sometimes people say to me, what's the best thing you do? And I said, well, best is the wrong word. I think the most effective use of my skills is often to be a guest at a boardroom lunch, in a dining room somewhere around Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne. And they go, why do you do that? And I go, because I get the chance to be a human message stick. Because I'm very often in a homogeneous group of people that have, had great educations, have come from the law or from a finance, accounting, or they've come in construction or engineering, and they've reached the highest pinnacles of their company as directors or as, leaders in the organisation or shareholders and investors. And as they've risen, their circle of influence has got smaller. So they stay, because their time is very precious and they've got very demanding jobs. So they read, and then the people that they're around are very similar to them, so they reinforce what goes on. And by the nature of what I do and where I've been, I have this broad circle of awesome humans that inform me, both through a very diverse information sources that come to me, but also just the humans that I interact with. And so therefore I can bring them different experiences. And so when I talk about the power of at a boardroom, and I give them examples of real things that are happening here in Brisbane, a laundry that got taken over, the Sunrise Laundry in Toowoomba, that got taken over by an impact investor, and they bought it. They've transformed it so that it now employs 32 people that are neurodiverse that didn't have jobs before that were living on benefits that came out of, the public purse. They now all have jobs, they have career paths. The labour costs for that business are 40% higher than their competitor. But the return on that business is still very good. It's an average return. And not only that, the people that have invested in are really happy with that return. So people invest in different asset classes. So a mid-return of, 8-10% a year is a good return repeatedly. And not only that, they get the benefit of the financial return, but they also feel very good about that investment because they get 8%. But they've also created life-changing jobs for people that are generationally changing for that family, for that community, and they're doing a useful thing. And the customers that come to them, the prisons and the hospitals and the hotels that bring their sheets and their disposables to be laundered come willingly because they get not only it at a fair price, which is compatible with other people, they get the value that they're doing something good as well. And that feel-good factor is it's what makes our societies work. So as I sit in those, it's not about being this kind of, I'm the tech person and I understand it all and you're all wrong. It's actually just asking better questions. How might we? Have we considered? And then exposing. So I do a lot of field trips. I ask people to come out. Let's go to a lab where robots are being used. Let's go to that business where they've got neurodiverse people working. Let's get out, because I find you can give a lot of people lots of things to read, but if we go and we meet the humans, the whole transformation changes.
Yeah.
I'm also looking for better solutions. Family and domestic violence. At the moment, that's another huge driver of our housing shortage, because sadly people are leaving a home that adequately could cope with the 5 people, and then 4 of those people leave that and have to fled and leave everything behind and have to start lives again. And then we've got these beautiful groups that are assembling to desperately find housing and help people resettle. And we've got charities working in this space. In Colombia, when that happens, they remove the perpetrator.
Yeah.
And the family stays in the house. And look, my lawyer friends will tell me a million reasons why that doesn't work today here, and I appreciate that. But how might we? That's all I would ask. Yeah. So if anyone could say, remember that it's and not or, and could you just ask, how might we? How might I build a house with no operating costs? And if it had no operating costs, then if I was building that for affordable housing people and they had no electricity because it produced its own electricity, if it had access to mobility at its doorstep so they didn't have to have cars, if it, its heating and cooling systems worked, using renewable energy that was freely provided, if we'd done a massive deal on the internet capability, because we now know the installation of a cable, the operating costs are like tiny to provide ongoing internet capability, that 90% of it is what you put in up front. So if we could find a catalytic way to do that installation and then provided people with free accessible, connectivity, how life-changing would that be for people that are living paycheck to paycheck, or even people at a higher end, how freeing would it be not to have bills to pay? Our superannuation system, another one I could go all day. But what if our superannuation system, instead of taking our money and then, having the risk mode of trying to invest diversively enough so they can give us a return, so that when I turn, 55 or 60 or whatever that age is, I get back an amount of money, and then I have to worry, will that be enough money for me to have food, clothing and shelter until the day I die and live respectfully and do the things I want to do? What if we actually had a proposition where a company said, I'll give you lifestyle as a service? So instead of them taking my money and buying, I don't know, Telstra shares, shares in all sorts of diverse equities, both here and offshore, and then really using all those quants and things in a public marketplace to try and derive the maximum return so they can give me back my money and give me back more money, what if they just gave me a value proposition that said, we will provide you with food, clothing, shelter, mobility, transportation and base level entertainment for a fee, a percentage of your salary, and we'll provide that for you while you're in your earning career, and then we have a slightly different model and when you stop your earning career. And so we're paying this kind of annuity, but we bundle those services. And then the superannuation, instead of going and buying the shares, buy the assets that provide the food, clothing, shelter, mobility, and telecommunications.
Oh, I love it. There's so many different things. Once you start thinking that way, it's almost like it's unstoppable.
Yeah, and then we think, oh my God, it'd be the Truman Show, right? So you've got to get to a little bit of reality. The models work, and then we've got to unpack those models and say, well, okay, that's utopia. Maybe that doesn't work. But somewhere between utopia and the poorly designed, highly inadequate things that we're doing today, there's a yes and, right? So I get another one is yes and. So I never say yes but anymore because it's not. People have made a contribution. I'm acknowledging your contribution. Yes, that's a fact right now. And we could maybe try to do it better. So I just say the word better is like my whole lexicon at the moment. Could we just have slightly more ambition, and could we thrive to do it better? And when you have those conversations with people, regardless of their age, their origin, their sexual orientation, what their lived life experience is, there's an ingredient that is human that comes out where people want to work together because everyone relates to that, how might we do it better? And it's like those beautiful 3 or 4 months after a disaster where we all come together and we know our neighbours. Wouldn't it be great if we could continue that without the need for the disaster?
Yeah, absolutely. So with everything that you've, been through, achieved, accomplished, but also the impact that you've personally made, what's the legacy that you want to leave for your life's work?
Yeah, it's interesting. I helped fund recently. I helped fund a wonderful female entrepreneur called Sam Jockle. That's run a what I would call a Netflix for parenting, called Parent TV, for a long time, and she realised that she was providing all these great solutions to how you parent with all these very complicated problems parents now have with their children, whether it be digital or how they eat, how they move, what they wear, and these great experts would give them little solutions, and they realised actually the kids are having more problems because the parents are bringing with us all these biases that unconsciously we brought to parenting that came through our parents, so maybe generations. So she's done a beautiful documentary called Seen, and it's a beautiful documentary. If anyone gets a chance, have a look at, just Google, it's called Seen, the documentary, and it's actually about how 4 really brave parents tell their story of transforming their own relationship with themselves and unpacking their childhood to then get a realization that they can do things better with their kids. And it's just really life-changing. And I think it's the same with and in that, a neuropsychologist called Selena Bartlett, another beautiful Brisbane lady that's in the neurology, neurodiverse space around how do we, because our brains change ourselves all the time. We can change quick. We don't realise that. We think we're stuck in our ways. We think we get old. And that's only because we keep having the same thoughts over and over. And so our brain thinks that that's the solution. If you can have diverse thoughts, you can change them very, very quickly. And she says she used to think, I'm leaving my kids my house and these assets as the legacy I would leave them. She said, now I know I'm leaving them the best of me in my neurology that I pass on to them so they can be better humans.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So I think in part the legacy, it's really uncomfortable with me, the word legacy, because that would imply that someday I won't be here.
Yeah.
And I don't say that out of an arrogance. I love living. I love life. I love our country. I think there's a lot of work to be done internationally. I'm watching lots of awesome people that I sponsor, and I try to help get voices to so that they can be heard, because if you look beyond our current sphere of influence, each of us will find people that are doing things differently. Let's look for those. Let's support media that's telling us those stories, whether it's be through people like you that are doing great podcasts, people on different channels. But so a legacy sits really uncomfortably with me, but I'm achievement orientated. So I love to see, I'm often early to things. So I come in and people will look at me incredulously and say, that lady. Often people, once they get to know me, will often say, when I first met you, I thought you were crazy. Like you were just weird. Like you thought differently. You just had this different persona. You ask these at the board table. You ask these questions. We go, where is she coming from? Like, whoa, is that on the balance sheet? And then they get to know me, and we work together for a little while. We become better humans, and we create a better sense of a shared space that we navigate together. And they come back and go, man, I learnt so much from you, and it's quite humbling because I don't set out to be a teacher. I set out to bring new information to people. And I get that because people bring new information to me. I feel very privileged to have that ability for people to come and feel free to share. So I'm very good at suspending judgment. So people all the time emailing me, can you have a look at this? Can you have a look at that? I've got this great idea. And I try to, within reason, take the time to listen and hear and then help them. I think I'm a bit of a dot connector, because sometimes it's just a little slither of thought that someone that's sitting in a traditional business needs, that just sets them on a whole different thinking path. And you know that yourself. Like, there was a time where we paid for text messages, right? And now we don't.
Yeah.
There was a time where the phone, when I was still alive, the phone was connected to the wall, right?
Yep.
What will the next 30 years look like? So we've got to be able to imagine those in order to make really good decisions now. And in a little way, we've got to start rethinking risk. The risk increasingly is not the risk that what we build or what we design today is not right for this minute. It's that it's not right for the lifetime that asset will need. And it's not the right use of the materials or the people right now. And just challenging yourself to that ambition of better and opening up, how might we, listening to a wider bunch of, a wider group of people to inform you. So the risk increasingly becomes, yes, you're building a great asset for now, but it's not for the next.
It's so interesting as well. The more I listen to you, even though it isn't something necessarily that you are focused on in terms of legacy, there's so much impact that comes through of everything that you do. If I look at you bring the new information because you want to challenge our ways of thinking, because you want us to design things that are sustainable for the future. You challenge ways of thinking and things like that with young, female entrepreneurs and things like that, because you want a more diverse and inclusive business world for different ways of thinking. So a lot of what I see your legacy to be is impact, ensuring what you do has an impact in whoever that may be.
If our world is better and it's more livable, it's more friendly, I envisage a time where the legacy of Queensland will be, we do structured work 2 days a week and we live well. We're all fed, homelessness is gone. We've built great structures and infrastructure through which we navigate our days that flawlessly intersects with, natural cooling and heating through nature. And our food sources are nice and clean. And finally, the world recognises that a kilo of beef and a kilo of beef are not the same thing. Calorically, the food and fibre we produce in this country largely is so superior to the rest of the world because our air is still clean, our water is great. If we work on our soils are better. The nutrient value of that food is really high. And often my friends that increasingly come from overseas say, you just don't know how good your food is. And then, of course, we go to America and we realise their portions are horrible, but also a lot of their food tastes like cardboard because it's built on the factory system. So much of the factory analogy has been infected in rather than the analogy of, not everything should be factory. It's like, how do we preserve that, local grown stuff close to us? So I kind of believe in this world that some people just say, I think that's utopic. And I think, no, I actually realize it's very achievable. And I definitely know with the millennials and the Gen Zs and the Gen Ys that are coming that are just, they're delightful because they're not encumbered with all this stuff that we learned in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s that we learned from people that we were told this is how you collar between the lines and this is how you become successful. And, I'm watching that next generation. I'm just so excited by them. And there's stuff they don't know, but they're so eager to learn. And then they have these great ways using regenerative AI, but also just different means to go and find new sources that you and I would never find. I sat next to a lady today that's just designed an artificial voice box. And she was started because her father lost his voice to cancer and he lived quite a while after that with that external voice, terribly thing that looks like it was designed in 1980 for a robot to speak. And she just the sound of losing her father's voice was she's an Iranian, beautifully talented Iranian lady. Lauren X is her company. If anyone gets a chance to buy it as it goes up, you should. She's now selling it all over America. She helps a non-invasive piece of technology that records the voice of the human before they lose their larynx, before they have the surgery. And then she designs a little digital, so far above my pay grade in terms of how the science works, but it actually does not invade your skin. It sits around your ears and it actually uses vibrations to then replace your voice with your own voice.
Wow.
Through this mechanism, right?
Yeah.
And it's such, that is just such a gift. But it was driven by human experience. And if we can just open ourselves to solve human experiences better and really she was driven by something much bigger than making a lot of money, or employing a lot of people or growing a great company. She'll probably do all of those things, right? And she'll also change a lot of lives. That's the end, right? That it's that intersection of economic, social and environment in just a really interesting way. And life is more interesting. The whole idea of going to the salt mine every day. I don't know how many people say to me, I can't wait to retire and play golf all the time. And I'm like, retirement doesn't sit very easily with me because I feel like I'm an artist and the work I'm doing doesn't really have an expiry date. I mean, I'm sure it will. There'll be times but And I want to make, I like to make room for other people to come, but it's interesting. Sorry, I divest.
No, I love it. I love it. And I'm the same. I mean, I feel like if you're focusing on retirement, then you might be doing the wrong thing, because I think when you start to get into flow and you start to find passion in what you do every day is exciting, and you wake up ready to take on a new challenge, because whatever you're creating or building is bigger than you. So.
I have one last one I do recall, because I had a bit of a brain freeze before when you asked me about an example. When I lived in Dubai, I went to Sri Lanka and I was on a tour. I remember this beautiful little Sri Lankan man. I asked him, beside these lovely bamboo houses that were sitting along the side of the road, each house seemed to be tied to a pole, which was also doubled as their mailbox. And I remember saying to this little Sri Lankan guy, why are these houses got this rope? What's the sign? Is it like a spiritual thing? I'm expecting that it would be, some local custom. He said, oh, no, madam, the UN put that there. And I said, the UN? What do you mean the UN? He goes, UN, World Bank, they come here all the time. They give us money to do things. They put the rope there. And I said, well, what purpose does the rope play? And they go, oh, well, madam, every year in the wet season, before they used to come and build our houses, and then in the rainy season, all the houses get washed away. And they said, now the house doesn't get washed away. The house floats up and the house stays.
Yep.
And so then we wait, we stay in the house, we go up with the water, we come down with the water, we take out the mud, and we go again. And I was just thinking to myself, sometimes your inspiration doesn't come from the smartest person in the engineering school. Sometimes it comes from really local practices of a really practical problem that our money was going, through World Aid to replace people's houses that got washed away all the time. And I know a small modicum of that has been learnt in Brisbane from the 2011 floods, where all our ferry stations washed away. Yeah. And we now notice that our ferries were built with a little bit of, they're now tethered to these poles that allow them to rise and fall with the river. And so they have much less. So I imagine, what else could we challenge? That's the design inspiration for me for the built environment and for how we're building our great structures, is how do we work with nature, not against it? How do we can't assume that the nature will stay stable. So, there's some much more exciting things we can do, materials we use. And, people said we can never build high-rise with wood. And yet look at King Street.
True.
It's all about how might we?
Thank you. I've got a bit of a fun rocket round now that I always ask.
Okay.
And it's just a little bit more
pressure.
about you. No. It's just like it's just a quick sum up of just a few questions to learn more about you. Coffee or wine?
Tea.
Oh, good. I had to know that you might say something different.
I used to be such a good drinker. Yeah. I was so good at it. And I just find I'm over 50 now and I'm just not good at I'm actually still okay at drinking I like nice champagne and nice red wine. I still like to drink it. But the next day, not so much. My body just doesn't process it so much.
Yeah. I don't love drinking as much even now. It affects me for a couple of days afterwards. I love
the whole socialization.
The celebration of it.
So I'm starting to have that socialization with soda water and a cup of tea.
Yeah.
So sometimes I actually sit at a bar at 11 o'clock at night and have a cup of tea.
Yeah, love it. I've had a cup of tea this afternoon. And cats or dogs?
I probably am a dog person. We had a menagerie growing up, so I've had every variety of every pet. Definitely not cat. Cats are just not me. And I don't have a dog because I feel like I can't give it the time that I need. The idea, So.
Yeah,
but I'm surrounded by them. I love them. I think they're beautiful, and I know the social sense of companionship that they bring, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. And favorite holiday destination?
Nature. So definitely water. Water is my thing. Beach locations, and then I love places that provide sort of divine learning. So. Retreats. And then I love the cut and thrust. New York, I lived there for 10 years. It remains a firm friend. There's something about really being inspired when I go there. And London, Paris. I love those great cities and, what you learn from them. But, Brizzy's pretty good.
I love Brizzy. Yep.
Bris Vegas.
And the other question I had is podcasts that you listen to, because I know you said you're an avid listener.
So I'm a bit of a tragic, I'm one of those people that understands that, politics doesn't rule our world, but it's a very big influencer. So The Rest is Politics, both the US version with Anthony Scaramucci that lasted 10 days in the White House. I love Anthony Scaramucci. And there's a British version that's much more serious. Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart put that on. So that gives me a bit of a view. And what I love about that is I get a different, that's not filtered by the news. So I get a little bit more of geopolitics at a global level through their sources. I think they're good. I listen to the Knowledge Bank, which is another one. There's a Stoic podcast I listen to that gives me a little bit of just a daily thought on. I'm fascinated by this Stoicism, which it seems to have its origins in religion, but it's sort of a life practice. So what might be a thought or a practice, whether it be breathing or moving, that you could do each day that just sort of slightly makes your, psychological state better.
Love it.
Yeah.
And what makes you feel like you're home?
The family dinner table, wherever that might be, family, friends, just, some nice food and good conversation and just a sense of camaraderie and community that shared meal gives you, and shared respect, and people that, what I love most about most communities that I interact with, but particularly Brisbane, is, the symbols of it are everywhere. The fact that we actually still like to help each other, genuinely.
Yeah.
And may that long live. As people come and find our city and love it, it's, we don't have, I used to sit on the board of Brisbane Marketing, and forever people were saying, we don't have a thing, we don't have an Eiffel Tower. And I go, we have a much better thing. We have an experience. And when my friends that have lived overseas come to Brisbane, they go, oh my God, we're never leaving. It's just such a friendly, easily navigatable city, and people are nice. Largely people are nice, and it all is tied up. If anyone catches a Brisbane City Council bus, how many people say, hello driver, thank you driver? It's like a Brisbane thing, and since the 50-cent bus fares have come in, it's even better. And that's symbolic of, if we can thank and acknowledge those people that serve us every day in the smallest ways, then that shows a lot for our society.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thoroughly enjoyed the chat. Could have talked for hours. It was great.
Probably said too much.
No, it was wonderful. What ways can people connect with you, learn more about what you do, support you?
Yeah. Always looking for people that want to help with this philosophy. I can give you loads of places to go and connect, to find new and different sources. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm very open for accepting on LinkedIn, unless you want to sell me something or tell me that you can fix my digital image very quickly. So very open on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. I used to be on X. I'm now on Blue Sky as @MonBLeaves. But just Google me. You'll see there's quite a bit, of things out there. And I'm interested in connecting and helping connect people into just how we can be better. And so if you're interested in that, and I think most people, are, then let's do it.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Loved our chat. Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of, I'm going to keep thinking the word or now, not or, the word and instead of the word or. So it's
just slightly better.
Yeah.
How can we just be better?
How might we?
How might we be better?
Yeah. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Monica.
Thank you.
That's good.
If this episode gave you new insights, don't let them go to waste. Take action, apply them. And if you want more insider strategies from the best in construction and infrastructure, make sure to subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the leaders who open the most doors aren't waiting for opportunities, they're building them.